What happens when the color of your skin is treated like a boarding pass error? When a man who paid for his seat in first class is told, in front of everyone, that he doesn't belong there. On Flight 726, Daniel Carter, a calm, accomplished black CEO, wasn't just asked to move. He was humiliated, doubted, and cornered by policies designed to look like procedure but dripping with prejudice. In that moment, with cameras rolling and passengers watching in silence, Daniel had a choice: accept humiliation quietly, or confront a system built to strip dignity from people like him. But here's the twist. What no one realized was that Daniel Carter wasn't just any passenger. He carried the power to bring an entire airline to its knees. And before this flight was over, his refusal to surrender a single seat would ignite a battle that reached the highest levels of corporate power. Would you have spoken up? Would you have stood with him, or would you have looked away, as so many did? Stay with us, because this isn't just a story about one man on one plane. It's about justice, dignity, and a reckoning no one saw coming. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss these powerful stories. The cabin hummed with a quiet luxury that only first class could carry. Overhead lights cast a soft glow on polished wood panels. The faint aroma of freshly brewed coffee drifted from the galley, and the seat's broad leather thrones seemed to cocoon their passengers in a bubble far removed from the bustle of the terminal outside. Daniel Carter eased into seat 2A, adjusting his jacket as he settled against the window. His movements were deliberate, unhurried. He had done this ritual countless times before boarding early, stowing his briefcase, opening a newspaper, or tapping into his tablet before takeoff. To the casual eye, he looked like any other successful executive, a man in his 40s, composed, tailored suit fitting like it had been cut from silence itself. But beneath that calm surface, Daniel carried something heavier than a briefcase, the weight of years of subtle battles fought in rooms where his presence was always questioned before it was acknowledged. For a moment, though, he allowed himself to relax. He glanced at the runway lights through the oval window, their glow fractured by the sheen of rain still clinging to the tarmac. A flight across the country was nothing new for him. Meetings in San Francisco waited on the other end, but tonight, he was grateful simply for the chance to think. The stillness did not last long. A voice sharp, clipped, and carrying the authority of someone used to being obeyed cut through the quiet. "Sir, I'm going to need you to move. That seat is reserved for a premium passenger." Daniel looked up slowly. Standing before him was Melissa Turner, the lead flight attendant. Her posture was impeccable, uniform perfectly pressed, smile painted on with corporate precision, but her words had no warmth. Her manicured finger pointed toward Daniel, as though identifying an intruder rather than addressing a customer. For a second, Daniel thought perhaps he had misheard. He unfolded his boarding pass with calm hands and offered it without hesitation. "Seat 2A, he said evenly, his voice carrying no anger, only fact. "Booked 3 weeks ago." Melissa didn't glance at the paper. Her eyes lingered instead on Daniel's face, then on the deep brown skin that defined it. The pause was louder than her words. From across the aisle, a man shifted in his seat. Richard Wallace, his platinum status pin glinting under the cabin lights, leaned forward with a smirk. His tailored sport coat and heavy watch gleamed like badges of superiority. "That's right," Richard interjected, his tone dripping with entitlement. "Clearly a mistake. That seat should be mine." A ripple spread through the cabin. Heads turned. Some passengers tried not to stare, their gazes fixed a little too firmly on their phones. Others lifted their cameras, just enough to catch the unfolding scene. Daniel inhaled slowly, the air steadying him. His instinct was to stay quiet, to let the storm pass. He had done that before, far too many times, but something in the pit of his chest urged him otherwise. He folded his newspaper neatly and set it aside, looking up at Melissa with a gaze that was calm, almost disarmingly so. "My boarding pass is valid," he said again, placing it gently on the armrest between them. "Would you like to scan it?" Melissa's lips curved, but it was not kindness. It was condescension. "We've had fraudulent bookings lately. I'll need to verify your credit card as well." The words carried through the cabin. Intentional. Performative. They weren't just for him. They were for everyone else to hear. A quiet murmur rose among the rows behind. Daniel could feel it. The shift. The silent judgment pressing against him. His jaw tightened, though his face betrayed nothing. He thought of his father, who once told him, "They'll test you in small humiliations before they try the big ones. The choice is always yours, bend or hold steady." Daniel adjusted his cufflink, a subtle gesture, grounding himself. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he studied Melissa, her posture rigid, her eyes betraying a flicker of something that wasn't procedure. It was preference. Richard chuckled under his breath, shaking his head as though amused by the performance. "Don't make this harder than it has to be," he muttered, loud enough for nearby ears. Daniel's silence spoke louder than words. He picked up his boarding pass, slipped it back into his wallet, and crossed one leg over the other. Calm, still, but a storm quietly forming behind his eyes. Somewhere a row back, a young woman shifted in her seat. Auburn curls framed her face, and her tablet slipped quietly into her tote. Her name was Emma Rodriguez. She frowned at what she had just witnessed, hand hesitating over her phone. Her conscience tugged at her. She had boarded this flight expecting a quiet trip west. But now she felt that same weight Daniel carried. Injustice didn't need to touch you directly for it to feel personal. Melissa straightened, waiting for Daniel to comply. Richard leaned back, certain he had already won. The rest of the cabin held its breath, pretending to scroll or sip their champagne. Inside Daniel, a quiet battle raged. Should I move, just to avoid escalation? Should I trade dignity for convenience again? Or do I stand my ground knowing what it will cost, but also knowing what it means? The hum of the engines outside deepened, vibrating faintly beneath his feet. Time was moving forward, but inside this cabin, everything felt suspended, teetering on the edge of something larger. Daniel leaned back slightly in his seat, eyes never leaving Melissa's. His voice, when it came, was quiet, but unshakable. "My seat is here. I'm not moving." The ripple spread again, sharper this time. Emma's hand finally lifted her phone, screen lighting up. A red dot blinked. The world was about to watch. The silence in the cabin seemed to stretch thin, like glass ready to shatter. Melissa Turner remained in the aisle, her hand hovering near her hip, chin tilted slightly upward as though daring Daniel Carter to resist further. Richard Wallace had leaned back smugly, the corner of his mouth tugged into a smirk, certain that this exchange would end quickly, with Daniel removed and him sliding comfortably into the window seat. Daniel felt the stares like heat pressing against the side of his face. He could hear the faint clink of a champagne flute 2 rows back, someone sipping too loudly in an effort to pretend they were not listening, though every soul in the first-class cabin was tuned in to the unfolding scene. Melissa's voice carried again, polite on the surface but sharpened beneath the veneer. "Sir, we cannot proceed until you cooperate." Please present the credit card you used for purchase. Daniel shifted slightly, adjusting his posture, his shoulders square. He spoke with evenness, the kind of voice that calmed boardrooms and commanded attention in negotiations. Is this required of every passenger in first class tonight? Or just me? The question did not raise his tone. He didn't need volume to expose the imbalance. A flicker of discomfort passed over Melissa's expression, but she recovered quickly, rehearsed authority sliding back into place. Sir, it's a standard security measure. Richard could not help himself. He leaned forward again, his cologne invading the air around Daniel's seat. Look, I have a meeting tomorrow in San Francisco. This isn't about you personally. It's about the airline keeping order. I'm Platinum Elite. I've earned the right to this seat. The words landed with condescension, a declaration of hierarchy as if loyalty points equated to humanity. Richard's tone made it sound as though Daniel's presence was an offense to some unspoken natural order. Daniel's eyes shifted slowly, deliberately meeting Richard's. When was the last time you were asked to show your credit card after boarding? Richard's mouth opened, then shut. He looked toward Melissa for rescue, his smirk faltering. That's different, he muttered weakly. The airline knows me. Daniel did not blink. They know you because you are white, or because you fly often. The question sliced through the cabin air. A businessman in row 3 lowered his phone as if caught eavesdropping. An elderly woman's brow furrowed as she glanced at her husband. A younger couple whispered, their hands cupped as though shielding themselves from the tension pressing into their chests. Melissa cleared her throat, her smile thinning into irritation. Mr. Carter, if we continue like this, we risk delaying departure for everyone. I suggest you comply so we can move forward. The words were designed to isolate him, to frame him as the villain in the narrative. It was a clever tactic. Turn the crowd against the individual. Make him the obstacle to everyone's journey. Daniel could feel the current shifting. From behind him came an audible sigh, someone muttering, "This is ridiculous. We'll be late." He breathed deeply, his mind weighing the invisible scales. The path of least resistance was clear hand over the credit card. Allow the humiliation and avoid further escalation. He had done it before in other settings, allowing small injustices to pass so the larger machinery of his day could continue unimpeded. But tonight felt different. Something within him hardened against surrender. He thought of his younger self, a boy sitting in a high school cafeteria, told by a teacher that his place was not at the honors table. He remembered the way he carried that wound silently, swallowing the sting because he had no power then. But he was not powerless now. He leaned back, his voice calm but resolute. I have provided proof of my purchase. That is sufficient. The murmurs grew. Phones began to angle, some pretending to check messages while recording video discreetly. And then Emma Rodriguez, the young woman with auburn curls, finally spoke. Her voice was clear, cutting across the low hum. Excuse me, this is absurd. He showed you his boarding pass. I'm recording this. The glow of her phone illuminated her determined expression. Melissa snapped her gaze toward her, sharp and commanding. Ma'am, please put your device away. This is an internal airline matter. Emma did not flinch. No, this is discrimination, and I'm documenting it. On her screen, the red live icon blinked. Numbers started small, 42 viewers, 76, but grew steadily, the counter ticking upward as comments rolled in. Melissa's composure stiffened. Her eyes darted toward Daniel, then toward Richard, and back again. She straightened her shoulders as if doubling down. "Sir, I'll ask one more time. Credit card, please." Daniel's hands remained still on the armrest. His expression was neutral, but his words carried steel. "I will not be singled out because of how I look." Richard scoffed loudly, his voice rising. "Oh, come on. Don't make this about race. It's about policy." Daniel turned his gaze back to him, unblinking. "And when was the last time policy applied to you like this?" The silence that followed was thicker than the recycled air in the cabin. Richard shifted uncomfortably, his bravado crumbling under the weight of logic. From Emma's phone, comments scrolled in rapid fire. "Stay strong. This is wrong. Name them. Expose them." The cabin's energy shifted again, the balance of support teetering. Some passengers leaned back, conflicted. Others leaned forward, curiosity etched into their faces. Melissa's smile had vanished entirely now, her mask of professionalism replaced with tight frustration. "Sir, if you refuse, I'll be forced to escalate this to security." Daniel's eyes lifted, calm but unwavering. "Security," he repeated, as though tasting the word. Inside him, doubt and conviction wrestled. He could picture the humiliation of being marched off the plane, the whispers of passengers labeling him difficult, disruptive, but deeper still, he could picture another outcome the truth made visible, not just endured. He thought of his company, Carter Global Holdings, the tens of thousands of employees who looked to him as proof that the system could be navigated, that success was possible. What message would it send if he allowed himself to be diminished in front of them? Even silently, he adjusted the strap of his briefcase, the leather creaking softly. His eyes scanned the cabin. He could see the tension in faces, the unease of bystanders who wanted to get moving, but also sensed something profoundly unfair in the air. Emma's phone counter ticked higher. 192, 270, 356. The world outside this cabin was beginning to see. Daniel leaned forward just slightly, his voice carrying enough for the first 3 rows to hear clearly. "You don't need my credit card. You need to confront why you are asking me and not him." He nodded toward Richard, whose face flushed with sudden discomfort. The murmur that spread was undeniable now. Even those who wanted silence could not unhear the truth. Melissa stood rigid, her authority eroding in real time. Richard sat back, eyes darting between them, his earlier arrogance fraying at the edges. Daniel remained steady, every movement deliberate, his presence unshakable. And in that moment, with Emma's camera capturing every breath, the confrontation was no longer just about one seat. It was about something much larger, and Daniel knew it. The cabin air felt heavier now, as though every breath carried a charge of anticipation. Emma Rodriguez held her phone steady, the small lens capturing the scene that most passengers still pretended not to see. The red light pulsed, the viewership number on her screen climbing with a life of its own. Within minutes, hundreds of strangers were already tuned in, typing comments that scrolled past so fast she could barely read them. "Is this real?" one wrote. "Name the airline." Another demanded, "This is discrimination live. Don't stop recording." Emma's pulse raced, her palms damp against the smooth edges of her phone. She had not boarded this flight expecting to become a witness, let alone a messenger. But now she felt something larger than fear. Larger even than the rules Melissa had barked at her just moments ago. The truth was unfolding here, and she had the means to ensure that it was not buried. Melissa's eyes had hardened. She stepped toward Emma, her voice carrying that polished tone of authority, the one designed to reestablish control. "Ma'am, I need you to turn off that recording immediately." Emma lifted her chin, her voice clear and steady. "No, I have every right to document what's happening." Her words struck the cabin like a match to tinder. A ripple of murmurs spread, some passengers whispering to their seatmates, others shifting uncomfortably as though the air itself had grown too tight. A man in the aisle seat across from Emma angled his own phone discreetly, the dark reflection of his screen betraying the recording he too had begun. Daniel Carter sat motionless, but his eyes flicked to Emma, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. For a brief second, he felt gratitude for this stranger's courage. It wasn't his style to draw attention, but he understood the power of visibility. Too many times the quiet injustices of the world were buried beneath politeness, left to rot unseen. Tonight would not be one of those nights. Richard Wallace leaned back in his seat, rolling his eyes with theatrical annoyance. "This is ridiculous," he muttered loudly enough for the surrounding rows to hear. "We all know what's happening here. The seat was assigned wrong, and this man is making it about something else." Daniel finally turned his gaze on him again, calm, unblinking. "And what exactly is it about?" "Mr. Wallace Richard smirked, though his jaw tightened. "It's about order, loyalty, people who play by the rules." Daniel's voice was quiet, yet it sliced through the hum like a clean blade. "Whose rules?" The words hung there, suspended in the recycled air. For the first time, Richard's smirk faltered. He opened his mouth, but the words stumbled, tangled before they could emerge. Emma's phone buzzed with notifications. Viewership had surged past 1,000, comments cascading faster now. Her audience, complete strangers scattered across the country, was no longer just watching. They were urging, pressing, amplifying. "Stay strong. Daniel, call her out. This isn't right." Daniel leaned back slowly, his hands calm on the armrest, his gaze steady on Melissa. "I've shown my boarding pass. That should be the end of this conversation." Melissa's professional veneer cracked just slightly, her jaw tightening. "Sir, as I've explained, this is for security. Please cooperate." Emma's voice rang out again. "He already cooperated. You're inventing hurdles because of how he looks." Gasps rose from a few rows, passengers startled by the bluntness. Some looked away, unwilling to take sides. Others leaned forward, their curiosity too strong to mask. Daniel felt the shift. The narrative was no longer solely between him and Melissa. The cabin had become an audience, witnesses to a confrontation that was rapidly transcending its origin. He could sense the weight of their stares, some sympathetic, some skeptical, all pulled into the orbit of this unfolding drama. And beneath it all, Daniel wrestled with his own storm. Part of him longed for quiet, for the comfort of anonymity. He had not asked for spectacle, but another part of him, the part shaped by every door that had once been slammed in his face, knew the importance of this moment. His silence would not protect him. It would only embolden the narrative that he did not belong. Richard shifted again, speaking with irritation sharpened by the attention. "You're wasting everyone's time. Some of us have places to be, real meetings, real commitments." Daniel's eyes lifted, calm as ever, "and my time is less real than yours." The hush that followed was deep, unsettling. Even the soft hum of the engine seemed to retreat, leaving only the echo of the question hanging in the air. Emma's live stream surged again. The viewer count hit 2,000. The chat filled with outrage, solidarity, demands for accountability. Emma's hand trembled slightly, but she held her phone firm, her voice low but steady as she narrated for her audience. A black man is being forced to justify his seat in first class. He showed his ticket. They still don't accept it. This is happening right now. Melissa's composure frayed further, her voice pitched sharper, losing the soothing cadence of corporate training. Sir, you're creating a disruption. If this continues, I will call security. Daniel did not flinch. He turned his gaze back to her, steady and unyielding. Disruption exists because you created it. The murmur in the cabin deepened. More passengers angled their phones, some openly now, emboldened by Emma's defiance. The air was thick with tension, but also with something else, a collective recognition that the script they had been fed was unraveling in front of them. Richard's frustration boiled over. He slapped his palm lightly against his armrest, his voice rising. Enough of this. Just move him so we can leave already. The arrogance in his tone grated on the ears of the cabin. The elderly woman in row 3 frowned deeply, shaking her head. A man in row 2 muttered under his breath, but his words were swallowed by the collective hush. Daniel's mind turned inward for a moment, a quiet battlefield of thought. He knew how quickly public perception could shift. Right now, Emma's camera was capturing him as composed, dignified. But if he raised his voice, if he showed the anger burning quietly within, that perception could crumble in an instant. He could not allow that. Not here, not now. He thought again of his father's words. Hold steady. So he did. He adjusted his cufflink once more, his gesture calm, grounding, deliberate. Then, with his voice low and even, he asked Melissa the question that could not be ignored. When exactly does this airline require platinum members to show their credit card after boarding? Melissa blinked, caught between her script and the unyielding logic of his question. She hesitated, her silence louder than anything she could have said. Emma caught it all. The hesitation, the falter, the unraveling. Her phone buzzed violently with comments. Got her. She can't answer. Expose them. Daniel sat back, his posture composed, his gaze unwavering. The balance was shifting again. This was no longer a simple confrontation. It was a mirror being held up to something far larger. The cabin hummed with unease, anticipation thickening like a storm on the horizon. And through Emma's screen, the world outside was already beginning to see. The cabin felt like a stage now, every word magnified by the hush of passengers leaning into the spectacle. Phones glowed in the dim light, some angled discreetly, others boldly raised. Emma's live stream count had passed 4,000 viewers, the chat a blur of outrage and encouragement. Daniel Carter remained still, his presence calm yet unyielding, the quiet center of a storm that was gathering strength with every passing moment. Melissa Turner's jaw was set tight, frustration radiating through her polished smile. She tapped her earpiece, murmuring something too low for the passengers to hear. Then she straightened, her voice carrying above the hum. Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated while we resolve a seating issue. Her phrasing was deliberate, framing Daniel not as a passenger, but as an issue. From the front of the cabin came the brisk click of heels on the aisle floor. A woman in a navy blazer appeared, ID badge swinging lightly from her lanyard. Her presence radiated the controlled urgency of someone accustomed to extinguishing fires before they spread. "Good evening," she announced, her voice clipped but polite. "My name is Karen Doyle. I'm the gate manager here at Hudson International." Passengers shifted, their eyes flicking between her and Daniel. Emma angled her phone discreetly, making sure the new arrival was in frame. Karen stopped beside Daniel's seat, offering a practiced smile that did not quite reach her eyes. "Mr. Carter, I understand there has been a mix-up with your seat assignment. We can accommodate you on the next available flight to San Francisco. First class, of course. And as a gesture of goodwill, we'll include a travel voucher for your inconvenience." Daniel listened, his expression unreadable. He adjusted his posture slightly, then spoke with the same even calm that had unsettled Melissa earlier. "There is no mix-up. I booked seat 2A 3 weeks ago. Here is my boarding pass." He held her gaze steadily. "I am already where I am supposed to be." Karen's smile tightened, the corners of her mouth rigid. "Sometimes," she replied, "our system misallocates premium seats. It happens. We find it's easier for everyone to resolve these things without delaying the flight." Her words were carefully chosen, her tone dipped in diplomacy. But Daniel heard what lay beneath remove the problem quietly. "Reset the optics. Pretend it never happened. And the resolution you propose," Daniel said slowly, "is for me to surrender the seat I paid for, so that someone else may have it." Karen's voice remained composed. "We can resolve this in a way that keeps everyone moving." Daniel let the silence stretch for a heartbeat too long. Then he spoke, his words carrying weight into the still air. "Does this airline's policy allow certain members to take seats from confirmed ticket holders?" The murmur from the rows deepened, passengers shifting uneasily. Karen's composure flickered, her eyes darting briefly toward Melissa before returning to Daniel. "That is not how I would phrase it," she said. "It is how it is happening," Daniel replied evenly. Emma's phone buzzed in her hand. 6,000 viewers now. The comments a flood. He's holding his ground. They're trying to buy him off. Don't let them spin this. Karen exhaled quietly through her nose, maintaining her professional facade. "Mr. Carter, if you gather your belongings, we can have your new boarding pass printed in minutes. You'll be on your way with minimal delay." Daniel studied her, his silence deliberate. He thought of how many times he had seen this tactic before, in boardrooms and negotiations, in classrooms decades earlier. The promise of compensation, the lure of convenience, the suggestion that dignity could be traded for efficiency. He leaned back into his seat, his hand resting lightly on the leather strap of his briefcase. "Compensation does not erase discrimination," he said. The words landed like a stone dropped in still water, the ripples visible on every face in the cabin. Karen's posture stiffened. Her polished exterior cracked for the briefest moment, her eyes flicking again toward Melissa and then to Richard Wallace, who was squirming now in his seat. Richard's earlier smugness had faded into impatience. He muttered under his breath, loud enough for nearby ears, "This is absurd. Just move him already. Some of us have lives." Daniel turned his head, his gaze locking on Richard with steady composure. "And some of us are tired of being told we don't belong." The quiet intensity of his words struck harder than a raised voice ever could. The businessman in row 3 glanced away, uncomfortable. The elderly woman in row 4 nodded almost imperceptibly, her lips pressed thin. Karen tried again, her tone firm. "Mr. Carter, please understand, if we keep discussing this, we will delay the flight for everyone." Daniel's voice was calm, but edged with steel. "The delay is not mine. The delay is yours." The passengers shifted again, their unease now tinged with recognition. The narrative was shifting. What had begun as an attempt to paint Daniel as disruptive was unraveling into a mirror reflecting the airline's own behavior. Emma whispered softly into her phone for her viewers. He's not budging. He's exposing them, one question at a time. Karen's earpiece crackled faintly. She turned slightly, murmuring low enough that only those nearby could catch fragments. Copy that. Understood. Handle quietly. Don't make noise. Emma's heart leapt. She caught it on her recording. Her audience's comments exploded. They said, "Don't make noise. They know they're wrong." Daniel's eyes narrowed subtly. He had caught it too. His mind worked quickly, connecting threads. This wasn't just Melissa or Richard. This was systemic. Someone higher was already giving instructions. He tapped his briefcase once with his finger, a quiet gesture grounding him. His expression remained composed, but his thoughts sharpened into clarity. He wasn't simply being asked to move. He was being asked to vanish, to make the problem disappear before it became visible. Karen faced him again, her voice carefully measured. "Mr. Carter, please, let's not escalate this further." Daniel's answer was calm, but final. The escalation was never mine. The silence that followed was palpable. The cabin strung taut, as though waiting for something to break. Emma's phone counter ticked higher, 8,000 now. The world outside was no longer just watching. It was waiting. Daniel sat back in his seat, newspaper folded neatly beside him, his presence steady and immovable. He was no longer just a passenger defending a chair. He was a mirror, forcing everyone in that cabin, and now thousands beyond it, to confront what they had long chosen not to see. And though no one realized it yet, the true escalation had only just begun. The hum of the aircraft's ventilation filled the uneasy silence. Daniel Carter sat motionless, the faint gleam of his cufflink catching the overhead light. Around him, the first-class cabin was strung tight, as if every passenger held their breath. Emma Rodriguez's phone kept recording, the live counter leaping past 10,000. Each new viewer was another set of eyes witnessing the balance of power teeter in real time. Melissa Turner stood rigid in the aisle, arms crossed, her eyes cutting from Daniel to Karen Doyle. The gate manager's smile had vanished, her expression strained under the weight of authority slipping from her grasp. She tapped the small mic clipped to her blazer. "Captain, we're still resolving the seating issue." The intercom crackled overhead, the voice of authority descending from the cockpit. "This is Captain Reynolds. We need a resolution now. If it cannot be resolved in 2 minutes, call security. We are not missing our slot." The word struck the cabin like a gavel. The murmurs deepened. A businessman sighed audibly, muttering about connections. A younger passenger in the back leaned forward, whispering, "Just let them handle it." The tide of impatience pressed in like a rising tide, subtle but powerful. Karen turned to Daniel, lowering her voice but ensuring those nearby could still hear. "Mr. Carter, you heard the captain. If you don't cooperate, security will board this plane. That will create a scene none of us want." Daniel's expression did not waver. He could feel the eyes on him, the subtle shift in energy. Some passengers were no longer just curious. They were restless, agitated, eager for resolution no matter the cost. He knew this rhythm well. Pressure was being applied not just through authority, but through the weight of the crowd, the collective sighs and impatient stares. He inhaled deeply, steadying himself. Security. The word pulsed in his mind. It was not an idle threat. He could already picture the scene, uniformed officers marching down the aisle, his presence framed as disruption. The live stream capturing the humiliation of a man escorted off a plane for daring to sit in the seat he had paid for. But then he pictured something else. The faces of those who looked to him beyond this cabin. Employees and partners who believed in him, who saw in his success a reflection of possibility. He thought of the countless smaller humiliations he had endured and swallowed, the times he had let it go for the sake of peace. Tonight, he felt the weight of all those moments pressing against him, urging him not to bend again. He lifted his gaze to Karen, his voice quiet but unflinching. "And what exactly will security do? Ms. Doyle, remove me from the seat I purchased lawfully." In front of witnesses and cameras, Emma's phone vibrated violently. Comments scrolled in. "Don't give in. Security means intimidation. He's right. They'll make him the problem." Karen's lips tightened. Her attempt at control faltered, and for the first time, uncertainty flickered across her face. Richard Wallace, still in his aisle seat, seized the moment to reassert himself. He leaned forward, his voice loud and cutting. "This is madness. Some of us have actual work to do. This man is holding us all hostage." Daniel turned his head slowly, his eyes steady on Richard. "Hostage?" he repeated softly, as though tasting the word. Then he shook his head once. "The only hostage here is the truth." The silence that followed was electric. Even those who had grown impatient leaned back slightly, caught by the sharp precision of his reply. Melissa, emboldened by the captain's order, stepped forward again. "Sir, you are now delaying departure. If you simply comply, we can all move forward." Daniel's voice was calm, but each syllable cut with clarity. "I am not delaying anything. I am seated, as my ticket requires. The delay belongs to those who cannot accept that fact." His words traveled the length of the cabin, and Emma captured every moment. Her audience erupted, some cheering, some demanding the airline's name, others pleading with him to stand strong. Karen's hand pressed against her earpiece again. "Captain, the passenger refuses to comply. What are your instructions?" The intercom crackled once more. "This is Reynolds. Call security. Remove him quietly so we can depart." Daniel sat back, his jaw tightening. Quietly. The word echoed in his mind. That was always the plan. Make the problem vanish without witnesses, without accountability. But this time, the plan had a flaw. Emma's phone. The other phones raised discreetly, the eyes of thousands beyond this cabin. Emma whispered into her mic for her viewers. "They're calling security. Stay with me. You need to see this." Daniel adjusted the strap of his briefcase on his lap. He was not trembling. He was not flustered. He was steady, deliberate, though his thoughts churned beneath the surface. He had two choices: relent and vanish, or hold steady and face the storm. His father's voice returned to him, an echo from years ago. "Strength is not loud. Son, it is steady." Daniel leaned forward slightly, his voice carrying without force, only conviction. "When security arrives, I will remain seated, and everyone here will know why." Gas fluttered across the rows. Melissa froze mid-step, her confidence checked by the certainty in his tone. Karen's eyes widened just slightly, her mask of professionalism cracking. Richard scoffed loudly, shaking his head. "Unbelievable. He's doing this for attention." Daniel turned to him, his voice still calm. "No, Mr. Wallace. Attention found me. I am simply refusing to disappear." Emma's stream counter surged again. 12,000. 13. Climbing fast. The comments scrolled in a blur. "This is history. He's unshakable. Security won't change the truth." The aisle beyond the first-class curtain stirred. The faint sound of footsteps echoed from the jet bridge. The threat was no longer distant. It was approaching. Karen clasped her tablet tighter, her knuckles pale. Melissa smoothed the edge of her jacket, her earlier authority now brittle, fraying under the weight of an audience that would not be silenced. Daniel sat still, his presence calm, his resolve hardened. He was not just a man in a seat anymore. He was a line in the sand, drawn in full view of the world. And as the shadow of security neared the door, the cabin knew that the next few moments would decide whether this flight was a journey or a reckoning. The cabin door hissed as it reopened, the sound cutting through the tense silence like a blade. 2 uniformed airport security officers stepped inside, their polished shoes striking the floor with deliberate weight. The badges on their chests gleamed under the cabin lights, symbols of authority that drew every eye in the first-class section. Passengers shifted, some sitting up straighter, others ducking slightly as though to avoid notice. The hum of the ventilation was suddenly louder, or maybe it only seemed that way against the hush that followed the officer's arrival. Emma Rodriguez's phone trembled in her hand, the viewer count on her live stream surging past 15,000. Comments scrolled so fast she could hardly process them. They're bringing security. Stay strong. This is intimidation. Don't stop recording. Melissa Turner straightened immediately, her earlier confidence seemingly restored by the presence of uniformed backup. She gestured toward Daniel Carter with a flourish of her hand, her voice pitched to Carrie. Officers, thank you for coming. We have a passenger who refuses to comply with crew instructions. Her tone dripped with false professionalism, the kind meant to cast her as the victim of a disruption rather than the orchestrator of it. The taller officer glanced at Daniel, then back at Melissa. His voice was measured, neutral. We'll need to hear both sides. Melissa tilted her head, the polished smile flashing again. Of course, but we do need to remove him from the aircraft so the rest of the passengers can get to their destination. Daniel didn't move. His gaze remained steady, fixed not on Melissa, but on the officers now standing a few feet away. His hands rested lightly on his briefcase, his posture calm, unyielding. Before either officer could step closer, Daniel spoke. His voice was quiet, but it carried through the cabin with the precision of someone who knew the weight of each word. I am in my assigned seat. I presented my boarding pass. The only reason this has become an issue is because of the assumptions of your staff. The words landed with unmistakable force. Murmurs rippled again through the cabin, passengers shifting as though to absorb the truth in his statement. Emma whispered into her mic, her eyes locked on her phone screen. He's explaining it calmly. No shouting, no disruption, just truth. Richard Wallace, still fuming in his seat across the aisle, leaned forward again. His tone dripped with disdain. Officers, this man is holding us all hostage. Some of us have real business to attend to. Daniel turned his head slightly, his calm eyes finding Richard. The only thing being held hostage here is fairness. Mr. Wallace. The officer nearest to Daniel raised a hand, signaling for patience. Sir, we understand you feel you've been wronged, but if you continue to resist crew instructions, we will have no choice but to escort you off this plane. Daniel's voice sharpened, not in volume, but in clarity. Escort me for sitting in the seat I lawfully purchased. Escort me for refusing to surrender my dignity. His words cut through the recycled air, drawing more phones into view as passengers who had remained quiet began recording openly now. The narrative Melissa had tried to shape was dissolving under the steady light of Daniel's composure. Karen Doyle, still clutching her tablet like a shield, stepped forward cautiously. Mr. Carter, please. We can resolve this with minimal embarrassment. Accept the voucher. Take the later flight. And let's all move forward. Minimal embarrassment, Daniel repeated softly. For whom? Ms. Doyle. The question stopped her cold. He leaned forward slightly, his eyes steady on the officers. You should know that every word, every gesture, is being broadcast live right now to thousands of viewers. If you remove me from this seat, it will not be quiet. It will not vanish. It will be seen. Emma's phone buzzed violently. 18,000 now. 20. The audience outside the cabin was growing by the second, their outrage fueling every word Daniel spoke. Melissa's painted smile cracked. She turned sharply to Emma. Ma'am, I am ordering you to put that device away. This is an internal matter. Emma's voice was firm, her hand steady even as her heart pounded. No, this is public. This is discrimination, and people deserve to see it. The passengers stirred again. Some nodded subtly. Others shifted uncomfortably, unwilling to be caught in the middle, but no longer able to deny what was happening. The shorter officer glanced at his partner, uncertainty flickering across his face. He looked at Daniel again, his tone softer. Sir, is it true? You purchased this seat in advance. Daniel withdrew his boarding pass once more, crisp and clear. He held it between two fingers, his movements deliberate. Seat 2A, paid in full, 3 weeks ago. The officer took it, scanning it with his eyes. His brow furrowed. He passed it back. It checks out. Melissa's lips tightened, her eyes darting toward Karen. Karen stepped in quickly, her voice urgent, attempting to reclaim control. Officers, regardless of what the past shows, the captain has ordered us to resolve this. Daniel interjected before they could respond. Ordered you to remove the man who doesn't fit your image of a premium passenger. Ordered you to protect preference over policy. The tension was unbearable now, stretched like a rope about to snap. The officers stood frozen, caught between protocol and conscience. Melissa bristled, her authority slipping through her fingers. Richard muttered furiously, shaking his head. Karen's grip on her tablet was so tight her knuckles whitened. And Daniel sat still, every breath measured, his presence the calm in the center of the storm. He thought of all the rooms where he had been doubted, all the doors closed until he forced them open. He thought of the generations before him who never had the chance to speak as he did now. The weight of it pressed on him, but so did the clarity. He could not yield. Not here. Not now. He spoke again, his tone quiet but unshakable. If you remove me, it will not just be me you silence. It will be every passenger who has ever been told they don't belong. The word struck the cabin like a bell, reverberating in the silence that followed. Emma's live stream exploded with comments. Powerful. This is history in the making. He's right. They can't erase this. For the first time since stepping on board, the taller officer shifted his stance. His posture relaxed slightly, his eyes flicking toward Melissa and Karen with something almost like skepticism. He did not move to touch Daniel. He did not step closer. He stood still, as though waiting for someone else to make the next move. Melissa's face hardened, but her voice trembled just enough to betray her frustration. Officers, please, remove him now. But the officers hesitated, and in that hesitation, Daniel knew. The tide had begun to turn. For a long moment, the two security officers stood frozen in the aisle, their presence heavy but indecisive. The taller one shifted slightly, the stiffness of procedure draining from his shoulders as his eyes lingered on Daniel Carter. He had seen countless removals in his career, but this felt different. The passenger before him was not loud or unruly. He was calm, composed, and sitting exactly where his boarding pass said he should be. The silence in the cabin stretched. Every passenger could feel the rope pulled taut between compliance and conscience. Emma Rodriguez's phone kept streaming, the viewer count surging past 24,000. Her chat scrolled in a blur, messages flashing like sparks. Don't let them drag him out. He's making history. Airline is finished if they touch him. Melissa Turner broke the silence first. Her voice sharpened as though volume could reassert her fading authority. Officers, this is a disruption of flight operations. Remove him immediately. The taller officer did not move. Instead, he spoke carefully. Ma'am, his boarding pass checks out. He has the right to be here. Melissa's face reddened, her polished smile cracking under the pressure. She turned sharply to Karen Doyle, the gate manager, silently demanding backup. Karen's lips pressed into a thin line. She took a step forward, her voice pitched with urgency. The captain has ordered us to resolve this quickly. We can't miss our departure slot. Daniel's eyes lifted slowly from his briefcase to meet hers. Resolve, he repeated softly, as though tasting the word. And to resolve means what, Ms. Doyle? That I must leave so someone else can stay. The officer closest to him shifted his weight, the question landing with visible impact. It wasn't just passengers who were listening. Richard Wallace groaned loudly, exasperated. For God's sake. Yes, just move already. This entire cabin is waiting on you. Daniel turned toward him with deliberate calm. And how often have you been told to move? Mr. Wallace, how many times have you been asked to prove you belong in the very seat you purchased? Richard's mouth opened, but no words came. The arrogance in his eyes faltered under the weight of the question. A murmur spread among the rows. The elderly woman in 4C leaned slightly toward her husband. This doesn't seem right, she whispered. He paid for the seat. Her husband nodded grimly. Quiet agreement, but agreement nonetheless. Emma whispered into her mic, her voice carrying the awe of a witness to something larger than herself. The tide's turning. People are starting to see it. Karen raised her voice again, trying to smother the shift. Mr. Carter, if you don't comply, this entire flight will be delayed. Everyone here will suffer because of your refusal. Daniel tilted his head slightly, his tone calm but firm. Suffer because of my refusal, or because of your prejudice. The cabin went still again. Even those who had been impatient shifted uncomfortably in their seats, confronted with the undeniable truth embedded in his words. Emma's phone buzzed again. 28,000 now. The chat scrolled, This is bigger than a flight. Corporate racism exposed live. He's speaking for all of us. Melissa's composure cracked, her voice pitched higher. You are disrupting our ability to operate safely. Daniel leaned forward, his eyes fixed on her. I am sitting quietly in the seat I purchased. I have not raised my voice. I have not threatened anyone. The disruption is not mine. It is yours. The truth of it was plain, written across every silent witness in the cabin. The businessman in 3B lowered his phone, now recording openly. Another passenger across the aisle raised hers higher. The quiet conspiracy of documentation was spreading. Karen's earpiece crackled. Her eyes darted sideways as she listened. Then she murmured under her breath, a slip she hadn't meant for anyone to catch. Evelyn said, handle it quietly. Don't make noise. Emma's hand flew to her mouth, her camera catching the words. The live stream comments exploded in real time. Evelyn. Who's Evelyn? They're covering this up. Handle it quietly. Hide it. Daniel caught it too. He leaned back in his seat, his expression unreadable, but his mind moving quickly. Evelyn, a name, a thread, the first glimpse of the system behind the faces in front of him. He spoke again, his tone low but deliberate, the kind of voice that forced those nearby to lean in. Quiet resolutions protect companies. Public accountability protects people. I will not be quiet. The shorter officer looked at his partner. Both men were visibly uneasy now, caught in the tension between the orders they had been given and the truth standing plainly in front of them. Neither moved to lay a hand on Daniel. Melissa bristled, stepping closer, her shadow falling over his seat. "Sir, this is your last chance. If you do not leave willingly, you will be forced to." Daniel looked up at her, his expression steady, his eyes sharp. "Then force me, and let every witness hear, and every viewer watching live, see exactly what that force looks like." Gas broke across the cabin. Emma's audience spiked to 31,000. Comments flooded in, her phone vibrating in her hand. Goosebumps. He's unbreakable. This is the moment. For a second, Melissa froze. The words she had prepared, the authority she had wielded so easily, collapsed under the weight of his defiance. Her mouth opened, then closed. She stepped back, suddenly unsure. Karen's voice faltered as well, her professional mask cracking for the first time. "Mr. Carter, please, this doesn't need to escalate further." Daniel shook his head slightly. "It already has." The officers did not move. The passengers shifted again, the silence in the cabin no longer carrying the weight of suspicion, but of recognition. Something had changed. The balance was no longer on the airline side. Emma whispered into her mic, her voice thick with awe. "He's flipped it. They don't know what to do." Daniel sat still, his briefcase resting on his lap, his hands folded calmly over it. He was not a man refusing to comply. He was a man standing quietly, immovably, in his own dignity. And as the minutes ticked by, it was no longer him that the passengers saw as the disruption. It was those trying to move him. The tide had turned, and for the first time since the confrontation began, Daniel could feel it. The cabin no longer felt like an aircraft waiting for departure. It felt like a stage, every row of first class transformed into theater seating. And at the center of it all, Daniel Carter sat still, his presence anchoring the room. Phones glowed from half a dozen hands now. Emma Rodriguez's live stream counter climbed relentlessly, 35,000, then 38, then 40. Every blink of the red dot meant another 1,000 strangers joining, watching, judging. Emma's voice whispered into her mic. "This isn't just a delay anymore. This is something bigger." The chat exploded. "They can't touch him now. Who's Evelyn? Find her. This is going viral." Melissa Turner adjusted her uniform jacket again, her jaw set, but her confidence was cracking visibly. She knew she was losing the crowd, not just in the cabin, but outside in the invisible audience swelling by the second. She glanced toward Karen Doyle, her eyes begging for direction. Karen stood frozen for a beat, clutching her tablet, then straightened with a brittle sort of resolve. She pressed a finger to her earpiece. "Copy that," she whispered, her tone sharp but hushed. "Understood." Daniel caught the movement, the way Karen angled her body to keep her voice low. He didn't have to hear the full message to understand. The higher-ups were watching. They were not just aware of what was happening. They were giving instructions. He leaned back, folding his arms loosely, his voice steady but loud enough for the passengers and the officers to hear. When companies say, "Handle it quietly," What they mean is, bury the truth. But the truth doesn't stay buried when the world is watching. The elderly woman in 4C exhaled audibly, a whisper escaping her lips. He's right. The officers exchanged another glance. They hadn't moved since they arrived, and with each passing second, their hesitation grew heavier, as though the weight of Daniel's words pressed them into stillness. Richard Wallace snapped suddenly, slamming his hand against his armrest. Enough. This whole circus is a distraction. He doesn't belong in this cabin. Everyone knows it. The eruption startled a few passengers, but Daniel's gaze moved to Richard calmly, unflinching. Belong, Mr. Wallace. What defines belonging to you, money status or skin? The word struck like a bell, reverberating down the rows. Richard's mouth opened, then closed, his face flushing crimson. He looked toward Melissa for rescue, but she avoided his eyes. The passengers stared at him with thinly veiled disgust. Emma whispered for her audience, her voice trembling with excitement. He just cornered him. Richard has nothing left. Karen's tablet vibrated. She glanced down, and for a moment her face betrayed something close to fear. She angled the screen away from curious eyes, but Daniel caught the flicker of an internal message header directive from Evelyn Shaw. So that was the full name. Evelyn Shaw, the architect behind the curtain. Daniel tapped his briefcase lightly with his fingertips. Steady, thoughtful. He felt the shift, the officers hesitating, the passengers stirring, the live stream expanding like wildfire. The tide wasn't just turning, it was breaking open. Melissa tried again, her tone brittle but loud. Sir, you're making this far more difficult than it needs to be. If you would simply accept our compensation and rebook, none of this would continue. Daniel's reply was calm, but laced with steel. Compensation doesn't erase humiliation. Silence doesn't erase discrimination. And moving me doesn't erase the fact that you judged me guilty before you even looked at my boarding pass. Gas rippled. Someone clapped softly from a row behind before catching themselves. Emma's phone buzzed. 50,000 now. The stream was spreading beyond her control, hashtags exploding across social platforms in real time. She could barely keep up with the comments. Say his name. Daniel Carter is all of us. Airline meltdown live. Karen's earpiece crackled again. She winced, murmuring something too low to hear. But her tone was defensive now, almost pleading. Daniel knew what that meant. Whoever was on the other end wasn't pleased with how this was unfolding. Daniel's calm voice sliced the tension again. You're not worried about departure. You're worried about exposure. Passengers turned their heads. Some nodded subtly. Others whispered. The truth was becoming harder to deny. Melissa's composure faltered entirely now. Her eyes darted across the rows, her voice sharper than before. Enough. Officers. Remove him now. But the taller officer shook his head once. Not until we understand what's happening here. The declaration drew audible murmurs. The authority Melissa had leaned on was crumbling, slipping through her hands. Richard sputtered, his frustration boiling over. Why are we even debating this? He's one man. He should move for the good of everyone else. Daniel's response was measured, deliberate, every word carved from iron. The good of everyone else has been used to justify injustice for centuries, not today. The line hung in the air, heavy, undeniable. Emma's viewers erupted, the comments wall flashing with fire emojis, fists, words of solidarity. Karen finally stepped forward, voice trembling between control and collapse. Mr. Carter, you need to understand. This isn't just about a seat. Daniel met her eyes. I know. That's why I'm still here. Silence followed. But it was no longer the silence of complicity. It was the silence of recognition. Emma's phone buzzed again. A private message appeared, anonymous but marked with authority. Keep streaming. FAA and DOT watching. Evidence is critical. Her heart skipped. She didn't look back toward the rows behind her, but she knew someone important was there, hidden among the passengers. Daniel saw her expression shift, but he didn't ask. He didn't need to. He knew the momentum had shifted beyond even this cabin. Eyes that mattered were watching now, and not just the digital crowd. Regulators, investors, decision-makers. He inhaled slowly, steadying himself once more. His calm was not performance. It was choice. Every breath, every pause was deliberate, the mark of a man who understood that patience was its own form of power. The officers stood down, folding their hands in front of them, waiting. Melissa looked stricken, her authority gutted. Richard sat rigid, his jaw tight, his entitlement curdling into fear. Karen clutched her tablet like a lifeline, listening to the faint voice of Evelyn Shaw in her ear, and Daniel Carter remained where he had always been, in the seat he had paid for, his dignity unbroken. The tide had turned fully now, and though no one yet knew the scale of the storm outside the cabin, Daniel knew. Exposure had begun. The cabin felt charged, like the air just before a storm breaks. The passengers weren't just observers anymore. They were participants, their silence turning into whispers, their whispers into murmurs, their murmurs into quiet statements of agreement. And through it all, Daniel Carter sat calmly in seat 2A, his hands folded over his briefcase, his composure the still point at the center of the whirlwind. Emma Rodriguez's phone buzzed again as her stream pushed past 60,000 viewers. She whispered into the mic without taking her eyes off Daniel. They're still watching, more joining every second. This isn't just a story anymore. It's an event. Melissa Turner's painted smile had vanished completely. She stood stiffly in the aisle, shoulders squared but posture brittle, like a statue about to crack. Her voice was sharp but carried none of the certainty it once had. Officers, if you won't remove him, then at least escort him to the jet bridge until this can be sorted. The taller officer crossed his arms, his tone firm, not without cause. And right now, all I see is a man sitting in his assigned seat. A ripple of approval moved through the rows. It wasn't applause no one dared yet, but it was visible. Passengers shifted, nodding, murmuring agreement. Richard Wallace leaned forward, his voice thick with indignation. This is absurd. I've been flying with this airline for 20 years. I've earned my place here, and this man. He stopped, biting off the last words, but the meaning hung in the air like smoke. Daniel's gaze turned toward him, calm and sharp all at once. You've earned miles, Mr. Wallace, not superiority. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the faint hum of the ventilation system. Karen Doyle's tablet buzzed again. She looked down, her face blanching slightly at whatever message had just appeared. Daniel caught the flicker of words before she angled the screen away. E. Shaw Directive. Enforce or escalate. The name pulsed in Daniel's mind. Evelyn Shaw. He knew it now. Knew who was pulling the strings. He leaned forward slightly, his voice steady, carrying to the back rows without strain. Ms. Doyle, did Evelyn Shaw instruct you to have me removed? Karen froze, her lips parting as though to deny it. But no sound came. Emma's camera caught every flicker of her expression. The chat exploded. Name drop. Evelyn Shaw. Oh, Boss, he caught her. Expose her. Karen swallowed hard, her voice faltering. I'm just following procedure. Daniel didn't let the pause linger. Procedure that selectively targets passengers who look like me. Procedure that asks for credit cards from black men in business class, but not from the white man across the aisle. Gasps rippled again. The elderly woman in 4C spoke louder this time, not just to her husband, but to the row. He's right. They never asked anyone else for a card. Emma swung her phone briefly, catching the woman's face before turning back to Daniel. Her viewers erupted again. This wasn't just Daniel's voice anymore. It was spreading among the passengers. Melissa tried to intervene, her tone desperate now. Sir, this is not about race. It's about protocol. Daniel's gaze cut toward her, calm and unwavering. Then tell me, when was the last time you asked Richard Wallace for his credit card after boarding? Melissa's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Daniel leaned back, his voice softer but resonant. Protocol is only fair when it's applied equally. Otherwise, it's prejudice in uniform. The officers didn't move. Passengers shifted again, some pulling out phones, others murmuring openly now. The momentum was shifting from quiet discomfort to visible alignment. Emma's stream buzzed past 70,000. She whispered, "This is going viral everywhere. He's breaking them down." Karen's earpiece crackled again. She pressed it tighter to her ear, listening. Her eyes widened slightly before she caught herself. She tried to mask it, but Daniel saw. He tilted his head, his voice quiet but precise. That was Evelyn Shaw, wasn't it? What did she tell you? Handle me quietly or escalate if I refuse to disappear. Karen hesitated too long. The answer was written in her silence. Emma repeated for her audience, Evelyn Shaw is the executive behind this. They're trying to bury him. The passengers stirred audibly now. A man in 3B spoke up, his voice rough but firm. This doesn't look like protocol. It looks like harassment. Another voice, a younger woman in 5A, added sharply, and it's being streamed. Everyone's going to see this. Melissa tried to shout over the murmurs, her voice trembling. Enough! You don't understand the damage this will cause if Daniel's reply cut through her words. Calm, but unrelenting. The damage isn't caused by exposure. It's caused by discrimination. The exposure only reveals it. The taller officer uncrossed his arms and looked at Melissa directly. Ma'am, I think you need to stand down. The shock that rippled through the cabin was almost physical. Melissa's authority had been stripped away in a single sentence. Emma's hand shook as she held her phone, whispering to her audience. Did you hear that even security is against her now? Karen looked stricken, her tablet buzzing again. Her lips moved faintly as she listened to the voice in her earpiece. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely more than a whisper. Evelyn wants this ended. Daniel's eyes sharpened. Then she should come end it herself. The line landed like a hammer. Gas filled the rows. Phones tilted forward to capture his face. Emma's viewers erupted. Call her out. Evelyn versus Daniel. Live. This is history. Karen faltered, but the earpiece crackled again. Louder this time. A faint, unmistakable voice carried through. Do not let him dictate terms. Remove him. The cabin stilled. Evelyn Shaw's voice had just been heard. Faint but real. Captured not only by Emma's phone, but by half a dozen others. Emma's whisper was breathless. We just heard her. That was Evelyn Shaw. Daniel leaned forward, his tone calm but ironclad. Then let the record show. Evelyn Shaw herself ordered a paying customer removed from his seat because of the color of his skin. The explosion was immediate. Passengers gasped. Some cursed under their breath. Emma's audience skyrocketed, the number surging past 85,000. The chat was a blur. Got her voice, lawsuit incoming. This is game over. Melissa stumbled back a step. Her composure shattered. Richard Wallace looked suddenly pale, as though realizing he was witnessing not a small dispute, but the unmasking of something far larger. The officers didn't move to touch Daniel. They didn't need to. The power had already shifted, and in that moment, Daniel Carter sat back slowly, calmly, his voice measured as ever. Exposure is no longer in your control. It's in theirs. He nodded subtly toward Emma's glowing phone and the sea of screens now lifted throughout the cabin. The tide had not just turned. It had roared in, unstoppable, undeniable, carrying with it the truth Evelyn Shaw had tried to bury. The power had shifted. The cabin lights seemed brighter now. Or maybe it was just the tension sharpening every detail, every glance, every breath. Daniel Carter remained seated, posture steady, but the weight of the moment pressed on everyone else. Karen Doyle clutched her tablet so tightly her knuckles were white. Melissa Turner stood rigid, her authority unraveling strand by strand. Richard Wallace fidgeted in his seat, unable to meet anyone's eyes. And then the voice returned, carried faintly through Karen's earpiece, but loud enough this time for others nearby to catch. Remove him. Do not let this escalate further. Evelyn Shaw's voice, cold, precise, dismissive. The executive mask slipped into the cabin like a blade. Emma Rodriguez's phone caught it, her stream counter surging past 90,000. She whispered into her mic, breathless. That's her. Evelyn Shaw. The executive. You all heard it. Passengers stirred audibly. The murmur swelled. Some cursed softly. Others shook their heads. One man in row 3 spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. That's not protocol. That's an order to cover it up. Daniel leaned forward slightly, his voice calm but resonant. So there it is. Not just a flight attendant's mistake. Not just a misunderstanding at the gate. This goes all the way to the top. Karen froze, her lips parting as though to object. But she couldn't. Her silence was an admission in itself. Emma's chat exploded on her screen. Corporate racism live. Share this everywhere. Daniel Carter versus Evelyn Shaw. The officer shifted uncomfortably, no longer even pretending neutrality. The taller one finally spoke, his voice carrying authority. With all respect, ma'am, we're not removing this passenger. Not under these circumstances. Melissa's face drained of color. She turned, desperate now. Captain, she called toward the cockpit. We need guidance. The intercom crackled. Captain Reynolds' voice crisp, businesslike, but tinged with unease. Ms. Turner, I've been briefed. Whole position. This is no longer a simple crew matter. The words landed like thunder. Even the captain knew this was beyond the scope of standard operations. Karen's tablet vibrated violently in her hands. She glanced down and paled. A new line of text scrolled across the screen. CEO will intervene. Patch through. A moment later, Karen tapped a command. The tablet screen lit up, and a voice filled the cabin. Clear and commanding. Mr. Carter, this is Jonathan Pierce, Chief Executive Officer of Northstar Airlines. The murmurs stopped instantly. Phones tilted higher. The audience in the cabin and online leaned forward at once. Daniel didn't move. His eyes stayed steady, his tone unflappable. Mr. Pierce, I assume you've been monitoring this. A pause. Then the CEO's voice returned, smooth but strained. "I've been made aware. And let me begin by apologizing if any of our employees have acted inappropriately." Daniel's eyebrow lifted slightly. "If," Emma whispered into her phone. "He's hedging." Jonathan Pierce pressed on. "This matter can and will be addressed internally. I ask that you allow us to resolve this quietly without further disruption." Daniel leaned back, his hands resting lightly on the briefcase. "Quietly. Internally. You mean without accountability?" A stir rippled through the cabin. The passengers weren't corporate insiders, but they understood doublespeak when they heard it. The CEO's voice hardened. "Mr. Carter, I assure you, our airline takes matters of fairness very seriously. If you'll allow me, I'll see to it you're generously compensated for this inconvenience." Daniel's lips curved faintly, but it wasn't a smile. Compensation doesn't erase discrimination. It doesn't undo the humiliation your employees inflicted in front of an entire cabin. Richard Wallace shifted in his seat, muttering under his breath. "Humiliation. You're the one dragging this out." Daniel turned his gaze on him briefly. "And you're the one who thought privilege meant priority. Tell me, Mr. Wallace, when was the last time you were asked for a credit card after boarding?" Richard flinched, his jaw tightening. He didn't answer. Daniel looked back at the tablet. "Mr. Pierce, I'm not interested in payouts. I'm interested in change." The live stream chat ignited again. He said it. "Not money justice. CEO can't spin out of this." The CEO's voice grew sharper. "And what exactly are you demanding, Mr. Carter?" Daniel's tone was steady, deliberate. "Accountability, transparency, and systemic reform. Because what happened here isn't an accident. It's the natural outcome of a culture that treats passengers like me as suspects in seats we've paid for." The silence in the cabin was heavy. The words weren't shouted, but they landed with the force of a gavel. Evelyn Shaw's voice crackled faintly again, overlapping on another line, cold and clipped. "This conversation is inappropriate. Cut the feed. Remove him now." But Jonathan Pierce overrode her, his tone controlled but firm. "Evelyn, be quiet." Passengers gasped. Emma's phone caught it all. The chat surged. CEO just silenced her. "This is chaos. Boardroom war mid-flight." Daniel tilted his head slightly, voice calm. "I'll remain exactly where I am. And unless you'd like your shareholders to see this live stream and your regulators to open an inquiry by morning, I suggest you start listening." Karen swallowed hard. She glanced toward Melissa, who stood frozen, then toward Richard, who looked sickly pale. The balance of power had shifted so completely it felt surreal. Emma narrated softly into her mic. "He's dictating terms to the CEO. On a plane. This is history." Jonathan Pierce exhaled audibly over the line. "Then tell me, Mr. Carter, what would satisfy you?" Daniel looked around the cabin deliberately before answering, his voice firm but even. "What would satisfy me is a commitment, not to me personally, but to every passenger who's been humiliated, doubted, or silenced. That means policy changes. That means transparency. That means no more hiding discrimination behind the word procedure." Passengers murmured their agreement. Some nodded. Even the officers shifted in approval. Emma's stream counter ticked past 100,000. Her comments flew faster than she could read. Make them promise. Demand reform. Daniel Carter for CEO. Daniel rested his hand on the briefcase, his tone quiet but razor sharp. "And let me be clear. If you don't act, if you choose silence over change, I have the means to ensure this costs your airline far more than a seat in first class. Jonathan Pierce didn't answer right away. The pause stretched, his silence betraying calculation. But everyone listening understood. The man in seat 2A had just placed the airline's future on the line. And for the first time, the CEO of North Star Airlines sounded less like a man in control and more like a man cornered. The confrontation was no longer avoidable. It was here, in this cabin, with every eye watching. The silence in the cabin stretched, taut as wire. Jonathan Pierce's voice had gone quiet on the line, not because he was absent, but because he was thinking, calculating. For a man who had built his career on controlling narratives, this was alien ground. Every word spoken now was public, broadcast to a growing audience that no press release could contain. Daniel Carter sat with a patience that was not surrender, but command. His composure unnerved those who wanted him gone. Melissa Turner looked like she was shrinking into her uniform, her voice locked in her throat. Richard Wallace shifted miserably in his seat, the arrogance that had carried him onto the plane dissolving into silence. Karen Doyle's tablet buzzed again in her hands, but she didn't dare look up. Emma Rodriguez whispered to her phone. 115,000 people watching now. This is bigger than any of us imagined. Jonathan Pierce finally spoke, his voice slower, measured. Mr. Carter, I am prepared to discuss corrective actions, but let us do this once you've landed. Daniel's gaze sharpened. No, we do it here, now, with every witness present. Waiting until the ground only ensures your lawyers can rewrite the story. Passengers murmured again, louder this time, siding openly with him. The officers nodded faintly, as though agreeing it was the only fair path. Jonathan hesitated, then exhaled. Then tell me what you want. Daniel leaned forward slightly, his tone even but carrying the force of command. 5 things, non-negotiable. The cabin went still. Emma's audience exploded with comments. He's laying out terms. Listen, this is history. Daniel ticked them off one by one, his voice deliberate, as though each word was etched in stone. First, mandatory in-person training for every employee who deals with passengers. Not a box to check online. Real sessions, led by professionals, where prejudice is confronted, not hidden. Passengers nodded. Emma's viewers cheered in the flood of text. Second, transparency. Body cameras for all premium cabin and customer service interactions. Cloud storage. Independent oversight. No more denials. No more he said, she said. Melissa's face drained further. Richard looked appalled, but he didn't speak. Third, quarterly audits by an independent firm, and the results published publicly. No hiding patterns, no disguising numbers. Emma caught the reactions around her. The businessman in 3B nodded grimly. The woman in 5A whispered, that would change everything. Fourth, complaint data made public, broken down by route, by staff, by outcome. If you want to prove fairness, prove it with numbers. Daniel's voice was low, but resolute. And fifth, every allegation of discrimination must bypass middle management and go directly to your office. Mr. Pierce, no filters, no burying. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the hum of the ventilation felt muted, as though the plane itself was holding its breath. Emma's viewers erupted, yes! 5 points. Carter protocol incoming. Jonathan Pierce's voice returned after a long pause, the strain clear. Those demands will require enormous restructuring. Daniel's reply was calm but cutting. Less costly than lawsuits, less damaging than scandals, less destructive than losing your largest investors. Karen's tablet buzzed violently again. This time she couldn't hide it. The screen lit up with an incoming conference request. She looked up, pale. "The board wants in." Emma gasped softly, her mic catching every syllable. "The board of directors. This is about to escalate again." Karen tapped the screen. The small tablet connected to the cockpit system, projecting faces onto the comm panel near the galley. A grid of executives appeared, each square a window into a room far away, but suddenly pulled into the cabin's orbit. At the center sat Jonathan Pierce, tense. Beside him, another tile flickered. Evelyn Shaw, her expression carved from ice. Passengers leaned forward, some whispering, others filming. Emma whispered fiercely, "The board is here. Evelyn Shaw is here." Daniel turned his gaze to the screen, his tone calm. "So now we're all in the same room." "Good. Let's be clear, this isn't about my seat anymore. It's about every passenger who has been silenced or shamed because of who they are." Evelyn's voice cut through, sharp and controlled. "Mr. Carter, our airline follows standard procedures. This incident is regrettable, but it is not systemic." Daniel's eyes narrowed slightly. Standard procedure doesn't ask Platinum members for their credit cards after boarding. It doesn't target only those with skin like mine. Call it what it is. Discrimination written into policy. A murmur rippled through the passengers. Emma's chat scrolled furiously. "Got her! She's dodging!" "Expose her." Evelyn's lips pressed thin. "You're dramatizing an isolated misunderstanding." Daniel leaned back, his voice cool. "An isolated misunderstanding that your own directives instructed." Karen froze, her eyes wide. She looked down at her tablet, then back up, as if torn between fear and duty. Daniel's gaze held hers steadily. "Show them. Ms. Doyle." The silence was crushing. Karen's hands trembled as she tapped. The screen flickered, displaying a directive stamped with Evelyn Shaw's name, Seat 2A, Enhanced Verification. If resistance, escalate. Remove quietly. Do not create media exposure. Gaze filled the cabin. Passengers turned to one another in disbelief. Emma's audience surged past 140,000. The chat was chaos. "Smoking gun." She wrote it. "Federal case now." Daniel's voice was calm, almost gentle. "Not a misunderstanding. A system. A choice." Evelyn's face on the screen tightened, but she said nothing. Jonathan Pierce exhaled heavily. His polished mask cracked, his voice lower. "Mr. Carter, what you've presented here will trigger immediate review." Daniel shook his head once. "Not review. Action. You've heard my 5 requirements. Adopt them. 90 days. Non-negotiable." The board members on the screen shifted uneasily. One man cleared his throat. "That timeline is unrealistic." Daniel's reply was quiet, but sharp. 90 days, or my firm will divest every share, and we'll make sure the world knows why." Passengers gasped again. Richard Wallace sat frozen, his face pale. Melissa closed her eyes, almost collapsing against the galley wall. Emma's viewers were electric. He just dropped the hammer. 500M deal at stake. Carter holds the cards. Jonathan Pierce's face was pale on the screen. "You're threatening the financial stability of this airline." Daniel's eyes were steady. "I'm not threatening. I'm offering a choice. Protect dignity, or collapse under the weight of refusing it." The silence that followed was shattering. In that moment, everyone in the cabin and everyone watching around the world understood the truth. This wasn't a passenger refusing to leave a seat. It was a reckoning, and Daniel Carter had just placed the future of an airline on the scales. The cabin had gone utterly silent. Every passenger, every crew member, every officer stood suspended in the weight of Daniel Carter's words. On the screen, the board of directors shifted uncomfortably in their little squares, faces pale in offices hundreds of miles away, but suddenly tethered to the truth hanging in the air of flight. 7:26. Emma Rodriguez's phone trembled in her hand. Her voice was barely a whisper to her live stream audience, but it carried emotion sharp enough to cut. 160,000 people are watching this live. He just gave them an ultimatum: 90 days or nothing. Jonathan Pierce, CEO of Northstar Airlines, leaned forward on the screen, his composure cracking for the first time in his career. His voice had lost its practiced smoothness. It was rough with strain. "Mr. Carter, if we accept your terms, you understand the upheaval?" This will cause Daniel's reply was calm, unshaken. Upheaval is inevitable when you dismantle a broken system. The question is whether you dismantle it with purpose or let it collapse on its own. Passengers murmured agreement. Even those who had said nothing until now found themselves nodding. The officer, still standing at the aisle, looked less like enforcers and more like guardians, ensuring no one interfered with the moment. Evelyn Shaw's voice cut through from her square, sharp as glass. "This is outrageous. We cannot allow a passenger, any passenger, to dictate corporate policy." Daniel's gaze turned toward her, even though she was only pixels on a screen. "I'm not dictating policy. I'm demanding decency. And if your airline can't provide that, then it doesn't deserve to survive." The line landed like a thunderclap. Emma's chat exploded. "Preach. He's ending them. Daniel Carter is history." Evelyn's lips pressed thin, but before she could reply, another voice entered, a deeper, authoritative baritone, from a new tile on the screen. Harold Jenkins, chair of the largest pension fund invested in Northstar, his name heavy enough to freeze even Evelyn. "Our fund aligns with Mr. Carter's demands," he said simply, "effective immediately. We will support his 5-point framework. If the board refuses, we will initiate a vote of no confidence." Gasps swept the cabin. Emma's phone shook as she whispered, "Did you hear that a shareholder just sided with him? This is no longer a fight. It's a coup." Board members on the screen shifted in panic. Jonathan Pierce swallowed hard, his voice taut. "Harold, this is highly irregular." Harold's reply was cold steel. Irregular is watching an airline humiliate its passengers based on skin color. Irregular is ignoring discrimination until it explodes on a live stream with the entire world watching. This is survival. Daniel sat in silence, letting the words settle. He didn't gloat. He didn't need to. The battlefield was shifting without him lifting a finger. Passengers began whispering, some with awe, some with relief. A young woman in row 5 leaned to her neighbor and said, "That man just changed everything." Melissa Turner looked shattered, standing in the aisle as though the ground had given way beneath her. Her eyes flicked to Daniel, not with hatred anymore, but with something quieter, shame. Richard Wallace hunched in his seat, his platinum pin gleaming in the light, but now nothing more than a trinket stripped of meaning. Evelyn tried once more, her voice sharp. "We cannot simply cave to threats." But this time, Jonathan Pierce cut her off. "Evelyn, that's enough." His tone was firm, carrying the authority of a man finally pushed past the edge of hesitation. "Effective immediately. You are relieved of your operational authority pending investigation." Passengers gasped again. Emma's audience roared in text, "She's out! Justice! Game over! Evelyn!" Evelyn's square flickered, her face carved in disbelief before the feed cutter image. The board sat in stiff silence. Jonathan Pierce turned back to the camera, then toward Daniel in seat 2A. Mr. Carter, the board accepts your 5 requirements. 90 days. Full transparency. We will issue a public statement before landing. The words carried a finality that shook the air. For a moment, the cabin was still. And then, slowly, quietly, passengers began to clap. Not raucously, not like a celebration, but like a recognition. Applause that built not for theater, but for truth. Emma's phone captured every second. Her chat scrolled faster than human eyes could follow. Some viewers were crying in emojis. Others wrote paragraphs about how they'd been treated unfairly in their own lives. The moment was no longer about one man and one airline. It was about everyone who had ever been doubted, humiliated, or made to feel they didn't belong. Daniel didn't raise his hands. He didn't bow or bask. He simply inclined his head slightly, as though acknowledging the weight of what had been done and what remained ahead. Karen Doyle, clutching her tablet, spoke for the first time since showing Evelyn's directive. Her voice trembled. "Mr. Carter, I'm sorry. I should have spoken sooner." Daniel's gaze softened slightly, his voice gentle. "Speaking when it matters is never too late." Melissa swallowed, stepping forward. Her voice cracked, stripped of arrogance. "If there's any chance, I'd like to be part of fixing this." Daniel studied her for a long moment, then nodded once. "Redemption isn't easy, but it's possible. You'll have your chance." The passengers seemed to breathe as one, as though something heavy had lifted. The hum of the engines outside returned to awareness. The plane was still on the tarmac, yet inside, the world had shifted. Jonathan Pierce's voice carried through the calm once more. "Mr. Carter, when this flight lands, you will be invited to work with us directly on implementing these reforms. On behalf of North Star Airlines, I thank you." Daniel didn't smile. His reply was quiet, but firm. "Don't thank me. Prove it." The applause swelled again. Emma's stream counter ticked past 180,000. Her whisper cracked with emotion. "He did it. He changed everything." Daniel leaned back finally, his hand resting lightly on his briefcase. His expression was calm, not triumphant. He wasn't savoring victory. He was holding the weight of responsibility, because he knew this wasn't the end. It was the beginning. The officers stepped aside quietly. Passengers settled back, still buzzing, some openly texting friends and family. The atmosphere had changed from tense theater to collective witness. Emma lowered her phone slightly, whispering into the mic. "Remember this moment. A man refused to move, and because he didn't, an entire system had to." Daniel gazed out the window. The late afternoon sun glowed on the tarmac. He thought of the fight ahead, the policy drafts, the audits, the resistance from those who still believed in invisible lines of superiority. But he also thought of the voices that had joined the passenger in row 3 who spoke up, the woman in row 4 who refused to stay silent, the stranger live-streaming truth for the world. For the first time that day, his lips curved into the faintest of smiles. Not because he had won a seat, but because he had secured dignity for himself and for countless others who might never know his name. When the engines finally roared to life and the plane pushed back from the gate, it wasn't just a departure. It was a departure from silence, from complicity, from the quiet acceptance of prejudice disguised as policy. Flight 726 was no longer just a flight. It was a reckoning. And Daniel Carter, calm and resolute, had ensured that everyone watching on board online and far beyond would never forget it. And so, a single moment of defiance in Seat 2A became far more than a passenger's protest. It became a turning point. Daniel Carter refused to accept humiliation. And because of that, an entire airline was forced to confront the ugliness it had hidden behind words like procedure and policy. This story isn't just about a CEO with power. It's about the elderly woman who whispered, "This doesn't seem right." It's about Emma Rodriguez, live streaming truth to the world. It's about passengers who realize silence makes them complicit. And it's about the thousands watching who felt the weight of injustice and chose to bear witness. Discrimination can wear a uniform. It can smile politely while stripping dignity away. But it cannot stand forever, not when truth is spoken, not when courage refuses to move. Daniel Carter proved that power, used with patience and integrity, can transform humiliation into systemic change. As you leave this story, ask yourself, what seat are you sitting in, and when the moment comes, will you stay silent or will you stand for dignity? If this story moved you, make sure to like, share, and subscribe, because together we can keep shining a light on stories that demand to be told.